I think it's better. So welcome back to the channel. You know how this works. If you're new here, make sure to give the video a thumbs up and also make sure to subscribe. Also, my old subscribers, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. So we have already drafted the pattern for the, what do you want to call it? So we've already drafted the pattern for the top, and this is going to be part 2, and part 2 is going to be the sewing tutorial where we're going to be sewing top. But I did notice that my extension from the waist was a little bit too long, but though I preferred it longer, so if you don't want yours as long as mine, you can go ahead to make yours shorter. I used about 5.5 inches from the waistline, so you can go with 4 inches depending on how long or short you want the extension to be. So before I talk too much, or before you leave this video with my too much talk, let's get right on with the video. So I've already gone ahead to cut the pattern on my fabric, and if you recall from the pattern drafting tutorial, we've already added allowance on our back pattern, on our back piece, so there was no need to add allowance. So you're just going to be needing 2 pieces of the back piece. So this is the back, and I already have like 2 pieces of it. Wow, this is the lining, and I just added 0.5 inches here at the under bust here. So if you remember these parts, this is the lining for the front, so that's the only allowance I added over there. While this is the extension for the front, and it's going to be cut on fold over here, and I already added allowance on my pattern, so there was no need to add allowance. And the front is going to be cut on fold, while the back is going to have 2 pieces. So this is the front block, that's the one we slashed and spread, and I've already gone ahead to cut it on fold. And if you recall, this our pattern already had allowance, so there was no need for me to add allowance to this. So now that we have gotten all our fabric, it's time for us to go ahead to start joining the pieces together. Before I forget, also make sure to cut lining for your back piece, and also make sure to cut a lining for your extension piece. So you'll be needing about 4 pieces of the back and needing about 2 pieces of that extension over there, so that one will serve as the lining and the other as the main fabric. And that's what I did here. As you can see, this is the lining for my extension which I had cut. So first I'll be working with the 2 front pieces, the lining piece and the one we extended. Remember that we slashed and spread one, so those are the 2 pieces I'll be working with. So first I'll be tracing the darts, because we have a dart on this lining piece, and to trace my dart I'm going to place pins on each ends of the dart, which will help me in tracing my dart on the fabric. So now after we're done tracing the dart, you're just going to take this to your sewing machine and you're going to tack each of the darts on the lining. Now that we're done doing that, this is what we have, and we now have our lining pieces with my dart tacked. Now I'll work on the front, the main front block, and I'm removing the pins. And first what you're going to do is you're going to make a basting stitch. That's the longest stitch on your machine. You're just going to make 2 stitches right on the top, and also make those 2 stitches at the bottom. I'm going to use this to gather the fabric. So that's what I did here. As you can see, the threads, I've made the 2 basting stitches on the top. So I'll get my lining piece, which I tacked the dart already, then I'll get this long extension piece, then I'll place one side at one end, taking my pin to hold it down like so. Then at the other end, I also take at the other end, then also use my pin to hold it down at the other end. Then after doing that, I'm going to start gathering this until it is the same length with the lining piece. So I'll drag, pull the threads, gather the extension until I have the same length as the lining piece. Now after gathering, this is what we have. As you can see, it's already looking nice. You can already see that this was the initial plan, and this was why we needed a lining piece, and we also needed to slash and spread it. So now let's go to the next step. So first, as you can see, I unpinned that gathered part. So I'm working on the lining. This lining, I'll place the lining of the extension on the lining of the upper part, then I'll pin it all down together like this, right side facing right side, and I'm going to use 0.5 inches to join them together. So I'm joining the both linings together. So this is what we have after joining. So you can just go ahead, take this to your pressing iron, and you're just going to press the seams open, because that is very, very necessary. So after doing that, you're just going to take the lining of the back. So this is my back piece. As you can see that I labeled it lining, so this is the lining part. What we're just doing here is that we're joining the linings together. So with the right side of the back facing the right side of the front, we're just going to join it together, and I'm just placing right side facing right side. And what you're just going to do next is you're going to sew the sides using the allowance that was added. So I'll just pin it down using my pins, and I'm going to sew the sides using the allowance that was added, which was about 1 inch. So after joining the sides together, this is what we have. So now we are done with joining the lining. We can go ahead to join the main fabric. So here I have my gathered upper bodice, and I'm going to get the extension for this my upper bodice, and just the same way we did for our lining, we're going to be doing it for the main pieces. So here is the extension, and here is the gathered part. So what I'm going to do first before joining together, I'm going to create lines which I'm going to use to sew my bias tape on. So I'm just going to create the line. Just be free, you can create any design you like, but this is the design I went with. And after creating these lines, please, I advise you not to use a chalk like this. So after creating these lines, I created a bias tape. And how I got this bias tape, the width of my fabric was about 1 inch, and I folded 0.25 inches on both sides, and that's how I got this bias tape. You're just going to place the bias tape on each of the lines you created and sew each ends on both sides. So you place the bias tape on each of the lines which you created, and you're just going to sew it down on both sides. So after sewing my bias tape on the extension, this is what I have. You can see it's looking good. So now I can go ahead to place the right sides facing right sides, join the extension together, then I'll sew using 0.5 inches. Now, just like we did for the the lining pieces, I'm just going to get the back, then I'll place the right side of the back facing the right side of my front, sides facing sides, and I'm going to sew using the allowance which I added. So now after joining the sides and also sewing down my bias tape, this is what I have. And I also went ahead to fix a zip, but I ended up hating the zip. I didn't like the zip, so I'm just going to show you what I did next to get rid of the zip. But if you want a zipper, you can go ahead and fix your zipper now, but for me, I didn't want a zip, so I had to get rid of it. So So instead of going with zipper, I'm going to be going with loops instead, and I want the opening at the back to be about 2 inches wide, but because we need 0.5 inches to turn the side, so I'm going to be marking 1.5 inches on both sides, which I'm going to be cutting off from my fabric. So I marked 1.5 inches on both sides, and when we turn the side with the lining, it's going to give us 2 inches. I hope you understand. So now what we're going to do now, this is the spacing after I cut it. This is where I'm going to fix my loops. So I've already gone ahead to mark where I want my loops to be. It depends on the spacing you want, and I've already also gone ahead to create loops, and I'm just going to be cutting it off. I made my loops about 3 inches long because we're going to be folding it, so I want to make sure that it's wide enough. So I'm just going to cut about how many pieces that I want to create the loops, and my loops is 3 inches wide or long. Now I'm just going to fold my loops in like this because we need to fold it, and what you want to do is you're going to place the raw edge at the raw end of your back. So you're going to place the raw end at the raw end. You're going to hold it down with a pin, which you're going to take to your sewing machine, and you're going to tack, or you're going to sew it down. So I'll just use my pin to hold it down just for illustration, so that you know what I am trying to do. So I'll get the other one following the lines of where I want my loops to lay or sit. I'm just going to be placing this in a loopy or whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to place it in a loopy way, and I'm going to use my pin to hold it down, and I'm going to do this all the way to the end. So you're just going to make sure that you do this on both sides of your back. Now after fixing my loops and sewing it down, we can go ahead to work on the sleeves. So this is the sleeves. You can already remember that we cut this on the cutting tutorial. So the first step is we're going to create a channel for our elastic at the top. So you're just going to hem this. Remember that we added 1 inch for hemming, so you're just going to hem this using 1 inch. You're also going to hem the bottom because that's to create a channel for our elastic. So remember that we added 1 inch for the hemming, so you're just going to hem it using 1 inch. So after hemming, this is what I have. So now we can go ahead to cut or pass our elastic through this channel. So for the arm, for the elastic at the arm, I took my round arm measurement, then I subtracted about 6 inches from that, and that is how I got the length of my elastic. So I'm just going to get my needle and thread, and this is how I'm going to be passing my elastic through this hole. I'm just going to use my needle and thread to tie the elastic at one end, take my needle and pass it through the tunnels or the channels until I get to the end. So you have to do this for both the top and at the bottom, and this is what I have. Also, you have to make sure to sew the ends of the elastic just so that it can't remove or it can't leave the tunnels before joining the sides of the sleeves together. Before I forget, the length of elastic which I used at my wrist part was my round wrist measurement minus 6 inches. Now with right side facing right sides, we're just going to be joining the sides of our sleeves, and you're going to use the allowance which you added to join the sides of your sleeves. Now after joining the sides of the sleeves, this is what we have. Remember that we need 2 pieces of the sleeve. Okay, so now back to our bodice. We're going to be turning this with the lining now. Remember that we joined the lining and the main fabric separately. So with the right side of the lining, facing the right side of the main fabric, you're just going to sew around using 0.5 inches. So you're going to sew this top neckline here, then you're going to sew this loopy side, then you're also going to do this for the other side. Sew the top neckline, sew the sides with the loops, then you're going to sew this bottom part. We're using the same allowance, which is 1 inch all the way around till you get to the bottom part. So the only place you're not going to sew is the armhole, because that is where we're going to be passing the fabric through. So after sewing around, you have to make sure you notch, because that is very essential, because if you don't notch, your fabric piece won't lay flat when you flip it over. So after notching, I went ahead to flip it out from my armhole. So now it's time to attach the sleeve. So this V part here, we're just going to place it on that V part, making sure that the seams meet. So I'm just going to make sure the seams meet using my pin to hold it down like so. So I make sure the seams meet, sew it down like this, holding my pin. Then I'm just going to sew using 0.5 inches. So another hint, if you notice that this V part is too short for the V part of the body, so what I advise you to do is, I advise you, if it's longer, if this V part is longer, I advise you to hold it down a little bit at the side, then give it a try again. And if it's shorter, if your sleeve is shorter than it, I'll advise you to take your scissors and cut off some few inches, just so to give it the same length with your main fabric.